My name is Alara, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a quiet conversation between me and the world, spoken in charcoal smudges on my fingertips and the scent of old paper and oil paints. I am 34 years old, a painter by soul and, for a time, a bookseller by trade. My parents were librarians, people who found their riches in the Dewey Decimal System and the hushed reverence of a reading room. They gave me a love for stories, for the beauty in the overlooked and the quiet dignity of a life lived with purpose rather than fanfare. This is the story of how I learned to paint my own boundaries, using the most delicate and indelible colors, and in doing so, taught my husband's family a lesson in the true nature of value. The moment hangs in my memory like a single, perfectly rendered brushstroke, stark and defining. We were seated in the formal dining room of the Vance estate in Port Sterling, a room so grand it seemed to swallow sound. A cavern of mahogany and silk, where the air was heavy with the scent of lilies and generational wealth. Across the gleaming expanse of the table, Eleanor Vance, my mother-in-law, held court. Her voice, a finely tuned instrument of social calibration, was laying out the plans for the family's annual summer retreat. Serenity Cove Lodge, she announced, her silver-blue eyes sweeping the table, pausing for a fraction of a second too long on me. I've managed to secure the entire property for the first 2 weeks of August. It's a wonderfully exclusive place on a private island off the coast. Utterly rustic, but in the most refined way, of course. Forest bathing, private chefs, a natural spa, it's precisely the respite we all need. My husband, Leo, squeezed my hand under the table. His touch was a familiar anchor in the turbulent waters of his family. He knew, as I did, that this was never just about a vacation. With the Vances, everything was a statement, a reinforcement of their world and their place within it. Eleanor's gaze settled on me fully, a polite smile fixed on her lips, but her eyes were as cold and clear as ice. "Alara, dear," she said, the endearment a tiny, sharp barb. "You understand, I'm sure. An environment like that, it's an acquired taste. So remote, so intense. It requires a certain fortitude. We wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Perhaps it would be best if you enjoyed a quiet staycation here in the city." The silence that followed was profound. The clinking of cutlery ceased. The low hum of conversation died. 20 pairs of eyes, belonging to various Vance cousins, uncles, and aunts, turned to me. I saw a flicker of pity in some, a glint of ill-concealed triumph in others. I was, once again, the foreign object in their perfectly curated collection, the one piece that didn't quite match. Leo's grip on my hand tightened, his knuckles white. "Mother," he said, his voice low and tight with a carefully controlled anger. "That's absurd. If Alara isn't welcome, then neither am I." Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but a new hardness crept into her eyes. It was an expression I had come to know well over the 5 years of my marriage. It was the look of a matriarch whose authority had been questioned. "Don't be dramatic, Leo. This is a family tradition. Your cousins are flying in from Geneva. You can't possibly miss it because your wife is sensitive to the wilderness." She chose her words with surgical precision, each one designed to frame me as delicate, weak, and ultimately unsuitable. "She's not wrong," Leo, his sister, Chloe, added, swirling the burgundy liquid in her glass. Chloe, ever her mother's lieutenant. "Remember that hiking trip?" Alara looked so overwhelmed by all the trees. What Chloe conveniently omitted was that my overwhelmed expression was due to her complaining for 3 straight hours about the lack of cell service and the tragedy of scuffing her designer hiking boots. I had spent most of the hike quietly sketching the intricate patterns of moss on the ancient cedars, feeling more at home than I ever did in their sterile drawing rooms. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The initial sting of humiliation was there, a familiar ache, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A quiet resolve. I gently placed my free hand on Leo's arm. "It's all right, Leo," I murmured, my voice steady. "You should go. Be with your family." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of protest and confusion. But he saw the firmness in my gaze and reluctantly subsided. Across the table, a wave of relief washed over Eleanor's face. She had won. She had successfully carved me out of the family picture once more, reinforcing the narrative she'd been spinning since the day Leo brought me home, the quiet, penniless artist who had somehow ensnared her brilliant son. When Leo first walked into the dusty, sun-drenched bookstore where I worked, he wasn't looking for a rare first edition. He was just looking for a quiet corner of the world. He was different from the polished, transactional men who populated his social sphere. He saw the ink stains on my fingers and asked what I was drawing. He listened, truly listened, when I spoke about the way light fell across a page. We fell in love between aisles of poetry and history, a love that felt as real and timeless as the stories surrounding us. I thought it was enough. I hadn't counted on his mother. Eleanor Vance didn't just possess wealth, she was a custodian of it. The Vance name was etched into the cornerstones of banks and museums in Port Sterling. To her, I was not a person but a category, the bookstore girl. For 5 years, I had weathered the subtle storm of her disapproval. The thoughtful gifts of etiquette books. The constant, casual remarks, "Oh, Alara, is that dress handmade? How quaint." Or, "It must be so freeing not to have to worry about maintaining a family legacy." What Eleanor didn't know, what no one but my lawyer and a very discreet financial advisor knew, was that my legacy was far more vast and liquid than hers. My grandfather, a man my family had always affectionately called an eccentric hoarder, had been a German immigrant who fled before the war. He had a peculiar habit of accepting artwork from his struggling artist friends in lieu of rent for the small boarding house he ran. For decades, those canvases, dismissed as amateurish daubs, were stacked in his attic. When he passed, he left the entire collection to me, his only grandchild who shared his love for the arts. It wasn't until a curious appraiser, a friend of my father's, was helping me clear the attic that we discovered the truth. Tucked amongst the dusty landscapes were early, unknown works by Kandinsky, Mark, and Klee. The eccentric hoarder had unknowingly curated a priceless collection of German expressionist art. Over the past decade, I had been quietly, anonymously, selling 1 or 2 pieces a year through a private dealer in Zurich. The proceeds were staggering. I had built a portfolio of investments, properties, and philanthropic trusts that dwarfed the Vance fortune. But I told no one. I continued to live in my small, light-filled studio apartment, to paint, to wear my comfortable, paint-splattered clothes. I needed to know I was loved for the person I was, not for the numbers in a bank account. Leo knew I had a modest inheritance that allowed me to pursue my art, and he respected my desire for a simple life, a stark contrast to the gilded cage he'd grown up in. As the dinner party from hell finally wound down, Eleanor was radiant, describing the lodge's amenities for the 10th time. Completely off-grid, no tourists, just the sigh of the wind in the pines. It's the last bastion of true privacy. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the gracefully excluded wife. But as Leo drove us home through the rain-slick streets of Port Sterling, a plan was beginning to form in my mind, a composition taking shape not on a canvas, but in reality. It wasn't a plan born of malice or a desire for revenge. It was a plan born of a deep, unshakable need for self-respect. It was a plan to teach a woman who only saw in black and white about the infinite shades of gray. 6 months ago, when I'd first heard Eleanor mention Serenity Cove Lodge, a place her friends had been whispering about, I'd done some research. I was drawn to its ethos of conservation and harmony with nature. I also discovered, through my financial advisor's inquiries, that the family who owned it for generations was facing financial hardship. The patriarch had passed away, and his children were struggling to maintain the unique, non-commercial spirit of the place. They were looking not just for a buyer, but for a custodian. Through a trust established for my philanthropic and environmental projects, I began a quiet negotiation. It was a perfect fit. I wasn't just buying a luxury resort. I was preserving a sanctuary. The deal had been finalized a week ago. As we turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer in Geneva. The transfer is complete. The island and all its assets are now under the stewardship of the Aspen Light Trust. Congratulations, Alara. You've been so quiet, Leo said, parking the car. He looked exhausted, the conflict of the evening etched on his face. Just thinking, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that night. I'm so sorry about my mother, Elle. I'll call her in the morning. I'll tell her we're not going. We can go to the coast, just the 2 of us, rent a cabin. I turned to him, taking his face in my hands. The earnest love in his eyes was the one thing that had always made the rest of it bearable. No, I said softly. I want you to go. His brow furrowed. Without you? After what she said? Absolutely not. Leo, trust me, I said, my voice filled with a conviction that surprised even myself. I need you to go. I need you to go with them. I have a project I'm working on. It's important. But I promise you, we'll see each other there. He searched my eyes, looking for an explanation I wasn't ready to give. He saw no anger, no hurt, only a serene determination. He had learned to trust my quiet ways, my artist's intuition. He sighed, leaning in to kiss my forehead. All right, Alara. I trust you. As he said the words, I felt the final piece of my composition click into place. It was time for Eleanor Vance to learn that some people's value isn't displayed on a balance sheet, and that true wilderness isn't found in a forest of pines, but in the uncharted territory of a closed heart. The morning the Vance family departed for Serenity Cove was gray and misty, the sky over Port Sterling the color of a dove's wing. I watched from the window of my studio as the black town car came for Leo. He'd given me a long, searching hug at the door. Are you sure about this? He'd whispered. I've never been more sure of anything, I'd replied, and it was the truth. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. This was about me, reclaiming the narrative of my own life. While their private jet was ascending into the clouds, I was making my own, much quieter, travel arrangements. I packed a simple bag, a few changes of clothes, my sketchbook, a set of watercolor pencils, and a well-worn copy of Mary Oliver's poems. I wasn't flying. I was taking the ferry and then a small, local water taxi. I wanted to arrive the way the island intended, feeling the salt spray on my face and watching the forested coastline draw nearer, inch by patient inch. My destination was not the Grand Main Lodge, but a small, secluded cabin on the far side of the island, known to the staff as the caretaker's cottage. It was rustic and simple, with a stone fireplace, a wide porch overlooking a tempestuous stretch of sea, and the intoxicating scent of cedar and damp earth. It was perfect. The lodge manager, a kind-faced, silver-haired man named Arthur, greeted me at the small private dock. He had been part of the lodge for 30 years and had been instrumental in the transition. He understood my intentions implicitly. The family is due to arrive in a few hours, Ms. Hartman, he said, using my maternal surname, the name under which the trust was registered. Everything is prepared according to your instructions. Thank you, Arthur. And please, call me Alara. How is Silas? Cantankerous as ever, Arthur chuckled. He's in the greenhouse, fussing over his heirloom tomatoes and pretending he doesn't know what's about to happen. Silas was the head gardener, a man who had been born on the island and whose knowledge of its flora was almost mystical. He was a crucial part of my plan. From the quiet solitude of my cottage, I could access the lodge's administrative systems, including a discreet security feed of the main public areas. I watched as the Vance family seaplane, a shimmering silver dart against the gray sky, touched down on the lake. They emerged, a flock of expensive cashmere and confident strides, led by Eleanor, who was already inhaling the air as if she owned it. I watched her lead them into the magnificent main lodge, a structure of soaring timber beams and riverstone fireplaces. A fire crackled a warm welcome, and the scent of pine and beeswax filled the air. They were met not by a line of fawning staff, but by Arthur alone. Mrs. Vance, he said, his tone polite but neutral. Welcome to Serenity Cove. Arthur, Eleanor said, nodding curtly, already scanning the room with a proprietary air. Everything looks wonderful. Please have our luggage sent to the villas. I'll be in the Aurora Villa, of course. The Aurora Villa was the grandest of them all, a private house perched on a cliff with its own infinity pool. Arthur clasped his hands behind his back. I'm afraid there has been a slight change to your accommodations, Mrs. Vance. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. A change? I made these reservations 6 months ago. I booked the entire property. Indeed, Arthur said calmly. However, the new owner is currently in residence. They have taken the Aurora Villa for their personal use. The confident posture of the entire Vance clan seemed to deflate in unison. Eleanor's face, a mask of pleasant authority moments before, began to harden. The owner? What owner? This place has been in the McGregor family for a century. The McGregor family sold the property 2 months ago, Arthur explained patiently. The new owner has a different approach to management. They have a deep respect for the lodge's history of quiet contemplation and have requested that guests participate more fully in the life of the island. I don't care about the owner's philosophy, Eleanor snapped, her voice losing its polished edge. I paid for a service. I paid for exclusivity. I demand to speak with this person immediately. Of course, Arthur said with a small, almost imperceptible smile. The owner is waiting for you in the library. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched them on the monitor. This was the moment. I took a deep, steadying breath, set down my teacup, and walked from my cottage through the mossy, fern-lined path toward the main lodge. I entered the library through a private staff entrance just as Arthur was leading them in. The library was my favorite room, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the churning, gray-green sea. I was standing by the window, my back to them, sketching the flight of a seagull in my book. The owner is here, Arthur announced, and then quietly retreated, closing the heavy oak doors behind him. I heard Eleanor's impatient throat clearing. I am Eleanor Vance. I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding regarding my booking. Slowly, deliberately, I closed my sketchbook and turned around. The collective gasp was audible. Leo, who stood just behind his mother, looked stunned, then a slow, dawning comprehension spread across his face. Chloe's jaw dropped. The other relatives just looked utterly bewildered. But it was Eleanor's expression I will never forget. It was a chaotic storm of shock, disbelief, and a deep, sputtering rage. Her face, usually so composed, was completely unguarded. You, she breathed, the word a poisoned dart. Hello, Eleanor, I said, my voice quiet but carrying easily in the silent room. Welcome to my island. For a moment, she seemed to lose the power of speech. She just stared, her mind visibly scrambling to reconcile the bookstore girl in her simple linen trousers and soft woolen sweater with the person who now held complete authority over her much-anticipated paradise. This is a joke, she finally managed, her voice trembling. A cruel, pathetic joke. Leo, what is the meaning of this? I think, Leo said, his voice filled with a new kind of awe as he looked at me. Alara is the meaning of this. I took a step forward. This is no joke, Eleanor. The Aspen Light Trust, of which I am the sole director, is the legal owner of this island and everything on it. I bought it to preserve it, not to turn it into a playground for people who don't appreciate it. My gaze softened as I looked at her. I had to remember my purpose. This was not about victory. It was about connection. I heard you say that this place required a certain fortitude, that it was an acquired taste. You were right. But the fortitude it requires has nothing to do with enduring luxury, and the taste is not for fine wine, but for simple, honest work. For the feeling of soil under your fingernails and the satisfaction of watching something grow. What are you talking about? She hissed. Your accommodations have been arranged, I continued calmly. The family will be staying in the standard lodge rooms. They're very comfortable. Your deposit for the exclusive booking has been fully refunded. I paused, then looked directly at her. You, however, will be staying in the gardener's apprentice cottage. And for the next 2 weeks, you will be working with Silas. Your day will start at 6 a.m. You will be tending the gardens that provide the food for this lodge. You will learn about the patience it takes to nurture life from a tiny seed. The color drained from her face. You cannot be serious. I will do no such thing. I am a guest. You are not a guest, Eleanor, I said, my voice still gentle, but now with an unbreakable core of steel. You are a participant. Those are the terms of your stay on my property. If you find them disagreeable, the next supply boat leaves in 2 weeks. Until then, the phone lines and internet are, as you know, delightfully unreliable. Pandemonium erupted. Eleanor threatened lawsuits. Chloe called it a kidnapping. The cousins from Geneva began muttering about chartering a helicopter, a notion Arthur had already been instructed to politely but firmly deny due to unfavorable and unpredictable coastal winds. Through it all, I remained calm. Leo stood by my side, a silent, solid presence. He had trusted me, and now he was beginning to understand why. That evening, a grim-faced Eleanor was shown to a small, clean but simple room adjoining the greenhouses. It had a narrow bed, a plain wooden desk, and a window that looked out onto rows of budding kale. Her designer luggage sat, unopened on the floor, a monument to a world that no longer held any currency here. The first few days were a battle of wills. Eleanor refused to emerge from her room. I had her meals, simple, wholesome food from the garden, left at her door. On the third day, Silas, a man of few words and weathered, knowing eyes, knocked on her door. "The weeds won't pull themselves," was all he said before turning and walking back to his greenhouse. Later, from my cottage porch, I saw her. She had finally emerged, dressed not in gardening clothes but in silk trousers and a cashmere sweater, both of which were soon to be ruined. She stood stiffly as Silas handed her a trowel and a pair of gloves, her expression one of profound indignation. I didn't watch her constantly. I gave her space. I spent my days walking the island's winding trails, filling my sketchbook with the textures of bark, the shapes of clouds, the intricate dance of light on water. I spoke with Leo, long, deep conversations where we unburdened years of unspoken tensions. He was seeing his mother, his family, and me through entirely new eyes. He confessed his own weakness in not standing up to her more forcefully over the years, and I confessed my fear that in hiding my resources, I had also hidden a part of my own strength. We were rebuilding our foundation, not on the shifting sands of his family's approval, but